The sun was sinking low across the endless western plains, painting the horizon in strokes of amber, crimson, and gold. The tall grass swayed in the evening wind, its whisper like 1,000 secrets brushing against one another. It was a vast land of silence, an ocean of dust and brittle stalks that seemed to stretch into eternity. For days, no sound had broken the stillness except the creak of saddle leather, the steady rhythm of hooves, and the occasional cry of a hawk. Circling high above, Elias Kane sat astride his horse, a broad-shouldered cowboy with weathered skin and a kind of face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone that dotted the frontier hills. His hat was pulled low against the setting sun, shadowing a pair of eyes that carried both weariness and the weight of memories best left unspoken. He had been riding alone for weeks, no destination, no promise of arrival, just a man with a horse and the dust of the road. He had lived this way for years. The prairie was his companion, solitude his comfort, silence his only friend. Yet solitude has a way of making a man listen more closely. And on that evening, it was silence that betrayed him. For out of the vast emptiness came a sound so unexpected, so raw that it pierced him straight through the chest. It was the cry of a baby. At first Elias thought it must have been the wind. He reined in his horse and held still, listening, his breath caught in his throat. The sound came again, thin but desperate, a wail carried on the breeze that seemed to echo with hunger, fear, and loneliness. No coyote pup, no prairie bird made such a sound. It was unmistakable. Somewhere in this endless sea of grass, a child was crying. His heart thudded once, heavy and reluctant. He could have turned away, told himself it wasn't his business, that this land was merciless and what was lost was lost. That was the cowboy's way. Mind your own trail, carry your own burdens. But the sound struck something deeper, something old and broken inside him. Without another thought, Elias tugged the reins and guided his horse toward the cry. As he rode closer, the tall grass bent away to reveal a small rise in the earth. There, crumpled in the brittle weeds, was the figure of a young woman. She lay on her side, her dress torn, her hair tangled across her pale face. Her lips were dry and cracked, her skin almost colorless. The shallow rise and fall of her chest, the only proof that life still clung to her. Beside her, swaddled in a thin scrap of cloth, was an infant, tiny, red-faced, its little fists trembling as it wailed. The sound was jagged, aching, as though each cry was a plea for a mother too. Weak to answer, Elias swung down from his horse in one fluid motion and dropped to his knees. His hands, rough from years of rope and reins, moved with surprising gentleness as he lifted the child. The baby was icy cold to the touch, shivering even in the waning heat of the evening. Without hesitation, Elias stripped off his weathered leather coat, wrapping the tiny body inside its folds. The child's wailing softened slightly at the sudden warmth. Elias bent low, his voice gruff but tender. "There now, little one. You're safe. Don't cry." He glanced at the woman, her face half hidden in the grass. Carefully, he uncorked the canteen from his saddle and let a few drops of water fall onto her lips. For a long moment nothing happened. Then her eyelids fluttered weakly. She let out a faint groan, her cracked lips parting just enough to take in the moisture. Slowly, painfully, her eyes opened. They were eyes dulled by exhaustion, yet still carrying the faint spark of life. She looked at the stranger crouched beside her, her child in his arms. Fear flickered there for a moment, but it was too faint to take root. Her voice came out in a whisper, hoarse and broken. I thought it was our last night." Elias met her gaze steadily. He saw no bandits, no trick, no scheme, only a mother at the end of her strength and a baby who hadn't asked for this cruel hand of fate. Something inside him shifted, an old wound pressing open, a memory of a wife he once held, a child he once lost. "Not tonight," Elias said softly. "Not while I'm here." He slid an arm beneath her shoulders and eased her upright, steadying her against him while the other arm still cradled the child. She was as light as a feather, frail from hunger and thirst. The scent of dust and fear clung to her. "Can you stand?" he asked. She shook her head, tears welling. I can't, please. Just save him." Her gaze fell to the child in his arms. "Don't worry about me. Just take my baby." Elias felt his chest tighten. He had heard such pleas before from settlers on the brink, from men dying in the dust of battle. but to hear it from a mother, begging for her child's life while surrendering her own, it carved him deeper than any wound he'd ever taken. "No," he said firmly, his voice like stone. "I'll take you both." He lifted her as carefully as he could, balancing her frail body across one arm while the baby remained tucked close against his chest. With effort, he rose to his feet, carrying them both toward his horse. His horse snorted and pawed the ground as if sensing the weight of this moment. Elias secured the baby against his chest, then helped the woman onto the saddle, steadying her limp frame. He climbed up behind her, holding both her and the child close as he took the reins again. The plain stretched out before him, vast, unforgiving, empty. But for the first time in years, Elias Kane knew exactly where he was going. He wasn't just wandering anymore. He was carrying life, fragile and precious, and he silently vowed he would not let the prairie claim them. As the last light of the sun slipped beneath the horizon, Elias urged his horse forward into the gathering dark, the cry of the baby fading into a soft whimper against his chest. And so began a journey that would change all three lives forever. The prairie was not kind to travelers. It stretched on endlessly, rolling like a sea of yellow grass that bent in waves beneath the push of the wind. Days bled into nights, nights into days, and the land offered little mercy, neither food nor shelter, neither shade from the punishing sun nor warmth. When the cold crept in at dawn, Elias Kane knew this land better than most. He had ridden it countless times, crossing miles without speaking a word, surviving on grit and memory. But he had never ridden it like this, one arm steadying a frail young mother, the other keeping a newborn swaddled close to his chest. His horse groaned under the added weight, though it pressed on, as loyal as its master. Clara, the young woman, clung to the saddle horn weakly. Her lips were still cracked, her eyes shadowed by exhaustion. She had not spoken much since Elias had lifted her out of the grass. When she did, her voice trembled as though every word cost her something. Where are we going?" she asked one evening, as the sky dimmed to violet. Elias glanced at her. Her eyes, though dimmed by fatigue, still carried the strength of a mother desperate to keep her child alive. He respected that. It stirred something in him he thought long dead. "There's a settlement a few days' ride west," he said. "Small place. Folks there will help." Her gaze lingered on him, uncertain. "And you? Why would you help us?" Elias turned his eyes to the horizon. That was a question he wasn't ready to answer. He thought of the graves he had left behind years ago, the woman he had loved, the baby he had lost to fever before the child ever learned to walk. He thought of the silence that had filled his life since. The long years where the only company he kept was his horse and the open trail. At last, he said quietly, "Because someone has to." Clara said nothing after that, but the way her shoulders eased just a fraction told Elias that his words had given her some small measure of comfort. The days that followed tested them. Elias rationed what little food he carried: jerky, hard bread, dried beans, and gave most of it to Clara. She tried to refuse, weakly insisting he keep it for himself. But Elias only shook his head. "You need it more," he said, "and the boy needs you strong." The baby cried often, tiny fists balled in hunger. Clara tried to soothe him, rocking him gently against her chest, but her body had long since run dry of the nourishment he craved. Elias could only watch, jaw clenched, feeling powerless as the child whimpered against the harsh winds of the plains. One evening, as the sun bled out across the horizon, Elias built a fire with what little dry brush he could gather. He set a small pot above the flames, filling it with water from his canteen and a few shreds of jerky. It wasn't much, but it softened into a broth that at least carried warmth and strength. He passed the tin cup to Clara. "Drink." She hesitated. "You've given me everything already. What about you?" "I've had worse nights," Elias muttered. "Don't argue." Clara's eyes glistened as she took the cup in her trembling hands. She drank slowly, her lips quivering as the warmth spread through her body. When she finished, she glanced down at her child, who whimpered restlessly. Elias took a deep breath, then dipped the corner of a cloth into the broth and gently touched it to the baby's lips. The child latched instinctively, tiny mouth working at the damp fabric, taking in drops of the thin broth. For the first time since Elias had found them, the cries softened into a quiet whimper, then into silence. The baby's small chest rose and fell in the steady rhythm of sleep. Clara looked at Elias with wide eyes. "You saved him." Elias shook his head. "No, just bought him another night." But as he spoke, his chest tightened, the baby's fragile body resting in the crook of his arm stirred. Feelings he thought he'd buried years ago. He felt the echo of another child, one he had never been able to save. He blinked hard and turned away from the fire, staring into the darkness so Clara would not see the flicker of pain in his eyes. That night, as the wind howled across the plains and the fire burned low, Clara spoke again. Her voice was soft, half carried away by the wind. "My name is Clara, Clara Matthews." Elias nodded slowly. "Elias Kane." She hesitated before asking, "Why are you alone, Elias Kane?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze remained fixed on the fire, the flames casting shadows across his face. At last, he said, "Because it's easier that way." Clara looked at her sleeping baby, then back at Elias. "Easier, maybe, but not better." Her words struck deeper than he let on. He only grunted and tossed another stick into the fire. But long after Clara had drifted into an exhausted sleep, her words stayed with him, circling in his mind as relentless as the prairie. Wind up the next day brought new trials. The land grew harsher, less grass, more rock, the wind biting colder as they rode west. Supplies dwindled. Elias gave the last of his bread to Clara, keeping nothing for himself. His stomach gnawed, but he ignored it. By afternoon, dark shapes appeared on the horizon, men on horseback, at first just specks, then growing larger as they approached. Elias felt his jaw tighten. He recognized the swagger in the way they rode, the careless sway of rifles across their saddles. Bandits. He pulled his horse to a halt, squinting against the sun. Clara looked at him in alarm. "Who are they?" "Trouble," Elias muttered. The riders closed in, 5 of them, their faces grinning with malice. The leader, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, reined in just a few feet away. His eyes flicked to Clara and the baby, then back to Elias. Well, the man drawled. "Looks like Kane the Drifter's finally found himself some company. Ain't that sweet?" Elias' hand hovered near his revolver. "Keep riding," he said flatly. The scarred man laughed. "Or what? You'll shoot? Us all, with a woman and a brat hanging on you?" His men chuckled darkly, their hands drifting toward their weapons. Clara clutched her baby tight, fear etched across her face. Elias stayed calm, though inside his blood surged like fire. He had seen enough men like this, cowards who preyed on the weak, who thought life on the frontier meant taking whatever you pleased. Slowly, Elias spoke, his voice low, steady. "Dangerous. You lay a hand on them, and you won't live to regret it." The laughter faded. The leader's grin twisted into a sneer. He spat into the dust. "You always did think you were tougher than the rest of us. Kane, maybe it's time somebody proved you wrong." The prairie fell silent, the air heavy with the promise of violence. The settlement came into view at dawn. It was nothing more than a cluster of wooden shacks, a half-built church steeple, and a dirt street lined with wagons and tired faces. But to Elias, after days of wind and hunger, it looked like salvation. To Clara, it looked like the promise of life for her child. The baby stirred weakly in her arms, whimpering. Clara pressed her lips to his forehead, whispering, "Almost there, little one." "Hold on." Elias urged his horse down the last stretch of trail. Dust rose behind them as the animal's hooves struck hard earth. His jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the settlement, wary as always. He had been through towns like this before, some kind, some cruel. He hoped this one leaned toward the former. Few townsfolk noticed them as they rode in, women carrying baskets, men unloading crates, children chasing a stray dog. Their chatter slowed, replaced by curious stares. Elias dismounted first, steadying Clara as she slid down. Still clutching her child, she nearly collapsed when her boots touched the ground. But Elias caught her, strong hands steadying her against the saddle. "Easy," he muttered. An older woman, her apron smeared with flour, stepped forward. "Lord above," she gasped, eyes darting to the baby. "What happened?" Clara tried to answer, but her voice cracked. Elias spoke instead. "Found em out on the plains, starved, near dead. They need food, shelter." The woman wasted no time. "Bring them inside," she said, waving toward a low-roofed building. "Hurry now." They were led into a warm kitchen, the air thick with the smell of bread and stew. Clara was given a chair near the hearth, the baby tucked into her arms as another woman fetched blankets. Elias stood near the doorway, hat in hand, scanning every face that came near. He had lived too long on the edge to relax. Even now, Clara sipped broth spoon gently to her lips. The baby whimpered again, and a young girl brought a small cloth soaked in milk, pressing it carefully to his mouth. For the first time since Elias had found them in the grass, the child's cries softened into quiet sucking sounds. Clara wept silently, tears streaking down her dirt-stained cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered to no one, and everyone. Elias watched her, his chest tight. He had kept them alive long enough to reach this place. But was it enough? He had no plan beyond this, no home to give, no promises to make. He was a drifter, a shadow that never lingered. And yet, as he saw Clara's trembling hands steady with relief, as he saw the baby finally feed, he felt something stir inside him, something dangerously close to belonging. Later that night, Elias sat outside the inn, a cigarette burning low between his fingers. The sky stretched overhead, scattered with stars like frozen sparks. He listened to the quiet murmur of the town. Settling into sleep, Clara stepped out softly, wrapped in a borrowed shawl. She hesitated before sitting beside him on the wooden step. For a long time, neither spoke. Then, in a voice barely louder than the night wind, she said, "You saved us." Elias took a slow drag, exhaling smoke into the dark. "You give me too much credit." "It's not credit," she said firmly. "It's truth." Her eyes glistened in the starlight. "Out there I thought I was going to die. I thought my baby would die. But you," her voice broke, "you carried us. You gave us a chance." Elias stared at the glowing tip of his cigarette. "Maybe," he muttered, "or maybe I was just trying to pay a debt I can never repay." Clara tilted her head. "What debt?" He hesitated. For years, he had locked that door tight, never letting the memory breathe. But here, under the starlight, with Clara's eyes fixed on him, he found the words slipping free. "My wife," he said slowly. "Years ago, fever took her, and our little one, too. I wasn't there in time. Couldn't save them." Heist's jaw tightened, smoke curling from between his teeth. "I've been riding ever since, chasing nothing. Just empty miles." Clara's hand, trembling but determined, reached out and touched his arm. "You couldn't save them," she said softly, "but you saved us." Her words cut straight through him, sharper than any knife, yet softer than any prayer. For the first time in years, Elias felt his chest loosen, as though a weight he had carried too long was shifting. He dropped the cigarette into the dirt and ground it beneath his boot. Then he looked at Clara, really looked at her, this woman who had walked through death's shadow, clung to life for her child, and still found the strength to thank him maybe. Elias said quietly, "You saved me too." The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint sound of a baby stirring inside the inn. Clara rose to go back in, but before she did, she paused, looking at Elias with something unreadable in her gaze. Gratitude, yes, but also trust, a fragile thread of trust that tied them together in ways words could not explain. As she disappeared inside, Elias leaned back against the wall, staring at the stars. For the first time in years, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, the road ahead held more than dust and silence, a new,